take my headphones off. You do your thing, Tom.
Alright. So Hutch is playing black. And let's see. So far regular opening is taking place. c4, g6, bishop g5, bishop g7. Black just wants to castle. Regular development is on the agenda. White wants to probably launch a quick attack with bishop h6 protected by the queen, and then maybe some quick h4, h5. Just a moment. Okay, d5, that's an interesting move. Sacrifices a pawn in case white captures the black knight with the bishop, but he doesn't go for it, and probably it's a correct decision. However, I dislike the fact that white moved the same piece twice in a row, or should I say twice in general, before finishing his development. And Hutch continues to develop, so I predict white will play h4 and try for a quick attack. Otherwise his strategy is not very consistent, I would say. C takes d5 opens up the center, but black is the one who's leading in development right now, so it should not really favor white. If you will notice, white moved the same piece twice, being the bishop on g5, and then he moved the c4 pawn for the second time. So he's trying to take over the center, but black has an interesting way to counter it. I was thinking about a more active move, knight takes c3, followed by e7 to e5 break. Knight f3, bishop g4, putting pressure on the pawn on d4. So black is essentially threatening to capture the white knight, followed by capturing the central pawn on d4. A good move for white will be rook from a1 to d1, or even castling long. Bishop e2 is a mistake because it allows black to gain a pawn, and a very important pawn as well. His main asset was the center, and now that he's given it up, yeah, he's not going to enjoy the consequences. Okay, so white is thinking. By the way, the time control is 15 plus 10 seconds per move, so we have quite a long period of time to analyze and for Hutch to think. And originally we thought about playing 10 plus 0, but decided that this would be more educational. And in general, I recommend everyone who wants to improve their chess to play at least 15 plus 10. And even more importantly than playing as well as you can is to analyze every single game and trying to figure out your mistakes. So white continues the same pattern that I consider to be a slight mistake, moving the same piece more than once before finishing their development. So by the same logic, it would be a good idea for black to develop his pieces. He currently has an open d file, so a good plan would be to try to bring a rook to the file. So queen to d6 comes to mind, followed by either rook to d8. Personally, I prefer the a rook, so that the f rook can have some potential for future f5 if necessary, and take over the initiative on the f file. e5 is another good move, strengthening the knight on d4 and creating something called a far post. I talked about it a bit in the past, but the knight on d4 on an open file, if it's protected by a pawn, it becomes that much stronger. And now the queen doesn't no longer have to protect it. It goes to e7 and evacuates the d file for a rook, just like mentioned earlier. So black has the advantage. I like the fact that that Hutch is taking his time compared to his opponent. He's not in a rush. but I would recommend to play even slower, because 14 minutes is a large amount of time to think. So white does not threaten anything. Black plays rook a8, a logical follow-up. So he's threatening knight to f3 check, followed by rook takes the queen, and white moved backwards. In general, I prefer to move forward if possible. Even if the opponent has a threat, I would neutralize it while moving forward. But in this particular case, maybe white didn't have much choice. Now, Hutch needs to ask himself the two questions we discussed so many times in the past. What is the opponent threatening, basically? That's the first question. The answer is nothing. The second question, and the important one in this case, is which piece doesn't work, and the answer is the rook on f8 and the queen on e7. And he found an interesting idea to improve his queen with tempo on the bishop. I like the approach, and regardless to the queen h4 move that was just played, it's not necessarily bad, but he needs to take care of the f8 rook on the next move. And in order to do it, I was thinking it would make sense to bring it to the open file, but as you can see, the rook on d8 is kind of in the way, so I would play rook d6 followed by rook fd8. Even now, if possible. I don't see any threat by white, so doubling the rooks on the d file would make a lot of sense at this point. And the fact that black is a pawn up doesn't mean he has to actually win the game, like force the win. You can win by simply improving your pieces and preventing the opponent's threats. We call that prophylactic thinking, or prophylactic moves, we can say. So in this position, rook to d6 followed by rook fd8 is my main idea. You can also insert h5, I was just about to say it as he played it. It's a really good move to push the bishop backwards. If you can move forward with tempo and push your opponent's pieces backwards, then it cannot harm, provided there's no tactics that we're missing. And now, this is the key moment, because black needs to find a plan. All his pieces are better than white's pieces. He has a more active position. Either he has to go something along the lines of f5, which I think is a bit risky to open up the king, or, as I mentioned, the more, let's call it classical approach, to just double the rooks on the only open file that black has. So rook d6 or rook d7 followed by rook fd8. So he went for rook d6, that's really nice. Rook e3. Rook fd8 would make a lot of sense, but there's no need to rush. White is playing really quickly, and I think it's not the best strategy when you have a long game. But it does serve the psychological aspect of putting pressure on Hutch, because you can easily forget that you're playing a long game and start replying quickly. Even when you have an hour and a half on the clock in a classical game, when my opponent plays fast, I am tempted to respond quickly. So this is something to be careful at all times. If you have enough time on the clock, there's no need to rush. That's the number one rule in any position, but especially when you have an advantage. So Hutch chose to play rook f6, attacking the pawn on f2 with the rook and queen. I don't like this move too much, because it serves a threat, but not necessarily progressing black's position. However, white just blundered. He played queen d2 and allowed a really nice fork that Hutch spotted immediately. And I have to admit that by looking at the moves so far, I can see serious improvement since our first session to this day. And I'm not sure if I can take credit for it, because obviously it was all Hutch, and he collaborated with other chess tutors, let's call it this way. But I'm really glad to see it taking place. And my advice to you guys, if you want to improve as well, just play these kind of games, 15 plus 10 or longer, and analyze your games. So now he has a nice tactic. Instead of taking the rook immediately, he can capture a bit more material. And I will let you try to find it on your own. But it has something to do with the fact that the queen left and the white resigned before even letting Hutch find the move. So I'm guessing he will come back soon.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much analysis that one needs, but I'm sure you gave some
Well,
some value. What did you see any like mistakes that I made that I could find in the move order here?
well, the move that provided you the win was probably the least accurate that you made. Rook f6.
Yeah,
In my opinion, yeah.
No, go ahead.
It's a bit away from the direction of the game. You can double the rooks on the d file and then slowly improve your position. And had he protected in a bit more accurate way, then the rook on f6 would be slightly misplaced and the queen on h4 would have less squares and so on.
Yeah.
But it's not a big mistake. It's just one of those moves that if you insist on continuing this strategy, then it can lead to bad things. So
I thought about doubling the rooks on the d file. It was between that and rook to f6, and I honestly looked at the guy's rating and I was like, you know what, I think I can get away with
yeah, but
rook to f6.
that's a common thing that I do as well, and it's probably not recommended if improvement is the priority, because we want to play the most objective way possible against all opponents, even if it won't provide the best, the largest amount of mistakes from them. And
yeah, that's why I think coffee shop chess gets you in trouble if you're trying to improve.
yeah, that's true.
A lot of the times you're playing against the opponent instead of playing objectively what the best move is.
Yeah.
Let me thank my subscribers, and then I will jump into a new game here. Give me like literally 1 minute here.
Okay, so I don't know if Hutch, his viewers can hear me or not. So I muted myself for the moment, so just in case. So his viewers cannot hear me at this point. And yeah, just want to make sure everything is fine. I'm keeping my eye at the chat, both mine and his, to see if something is wrong. By the way, a username and a really good YouTube channel by the name of Experiments at Home, who has a Spanish equivalent, gave me the advice on the previous stream to improve the quality, and I wouldn't have noticed it without him, so thanks if you see it, Mr. Experiments at Home. I think the quality is higher now. I tried to aim for 720, but from what
Alright, I'm going to jump into another game.
I think it worked,
I'm
yeah.
in it now. No, I'm not. Now I am.
Yes,
See it there?
yes. Quick note before you go off.
Okay.
You didn't do anything wrong, but just to remind you, ask the 2 questions at every move and take your time. Don't be tempted if the opponent is rushing.
Okay. Yeah, I was moving a little quick. Alright, I'll try to do that.
Okay, so d4, d5 is on the board. c4, the queen's gambit. So if black takes, this is the queen's gambit accepted, and if it doesn't, it's usually called the queen's gambit declined. And black is already thinking, this is a good sign. So I'll repeat the 2 questions quite a lot during the stream, because I believe they are quite necessary at any level, even the highest levels. So knight f6, first of all, is giving up the center a bit. So white had an interesting option to take on d5 and gain a tempo, regardless of how black recaptures. Had he taken back with a knight, there would have been e4 e2 to e4 attacking the knight, and had black taken on d5 with the queen, there would have been knight c3 with the idea of attacking the queen with tempo. Hutch missed it. It's not such a big issue, but one of the key skills in chess is not only to play well, it's also to punish the opponent when he makes mistakes. But well, White's position is very healthy. Both of them brought the bishops out to the center. Now a logical follow-up would be to bring the knight, exactly, and then maybe e2 to e3, followed by knight g1 to f3, and we have somehow transposed to a regular Queen's Gambit declined, I would say. However, black has an improved version because his bishop is not stuck on c8. He managed to bring it out on to f5. So I would say the position is roughly equal already from, let's call it, professional point of view. But it doesn't mean anything yet. Obviously, white can fight for the advantage later on. So now black played bishop to b4, pinning the knight. It's a good move. White shouldn't be stressed from this fact. He should just finish his development by playing e2 to e3, bishop e2, short castles. And if black creates any threats, we can react only then. There's no need to delay the development for now. So the two questions: what is my opponent threatening is the first question, and if he has no threat, the second one is which piece doesn't work. So in this particular case, the opponent has no threat, and well, this move makes sense, but I usually refrain from developing the queen too early, just because it has some potential for trouble in case my opponent develops with tempi. Tempi is the plural for tempo, like he develops while gaining time on the queen. Okay, knight c6, a3. So it's not a bad move, especially now that black gave up a piece very quickly. But once again, I refrain from making moves that are not developing my pieces. And a3, even though it was attacking the bishop, it was kind of losing a tempo in case black took on c3 with check. So once again, Hutch made a slight inaccuracy, and in response his opponent blundered. But it's not over yet. A piece up is objectively already winning if white plays correctly, but the queen on b4 is slightly misplaced, even though it prevents black from castling. It might get into trouble if black finds some creative ways to attack it, such as bishop c2 followed by a5 and so on. And e3 is a good move, a good antidote. Not sure if we even need to spot black's idea of bishop c2, because now white simply wants to trade the strong knight on c4 while developing the bishop, and there is no reason to avoid doing it. So back to the questions. What is my opponent threatening? From Hutch's point of view, nothing. Yeah, there is no real threat to capture anything quite yet. So which piece doesn't work? The bishop on f1. Where can I develop it? Ideally with tempo. c4, capturing the knight. If capturing the knight wouldn't be the best option, then I would choose bishop to e2 followed by short castles. But obviously, winning a pawn while trading the strongest piece of my opponent is always nice, especially if it comes with tempo. So d takes c4, queen takes c4 is called for, nice. Otherwise black would have defended with b7, b5. Short castles. And now it's somewhat tempting to capture on c7 since the bishop and queen are attacking it, but I wouldn't rush to do it. Unless, I mean, you take with the queen and want to exchange queens, which is a good idea to exchange pieces when you're up a piece. But castling is safe and strong. And it's probably the move I would have played as well. Okay, b5. Now black is really provoking white to capture the pawn. And I mean, if I move the queen, I might as well move forward. And I might as well capture the pawn and offer to trade queens. So I like the fact that Hutch is taking his time. I'm sure he spotted the idea of taking on c7. And he's now trying to see if there is any danger ahead. So even now I would be disciplined with white, asking myself what does my opponent want, or what is he threatening. Obviously it was to capture the queen. Okay, we move the queen back to the center, and it's not a bad move, but in general, even without capturing the pawn on c7, I prefer to move forward at any move over moving backwards. Even at the highest levels, there is more chance of it being the correct move when you just move forward at all times if you don't give up anything. Okay, what is black threatening now that he played knight h5? He wants to capture on f4, and it's not bad for white to trade pieces, but it will ruin the structure a little bit because white's center will be a little bit misplaced, and the d pawn on d4 will be isolated. So personally, I would have moved the bishop, probably to e5, but and after black plays f6 to attack the bishop on e5 to retreat back to g3, and then aiming to recapture with the h pawn. But in this case, it's h3 is a nice move now, preparing bishop to h2. So I assume that's the main idea. It's a useful move in itself to make create a luft for the king. But yeah, g4, I'm not sure I like this move. It's provoking what black already wanted to do, taking the bishop. It's a little bit too aggressive. So I have a remark to make. I'll keep it for after the game, when I say something to Hutch about it. But just typing it in case I forget. Okay, so the knight attacks the queen, so there is no choice. Oh man, that was a little bit of a misstep. Actually, I might as well call it a blunder. I'm not sure if Hutch missed that the pawn could have taken the knight, or if he was scared of something after it. He takes f4. I guess he missed knight takes f4 in that particular moment, and he forgot that the pawn was protecting it. But I'll have to ask him afterwards. Now knight, or maybe he just thought that now he is attacking two pieces. Knight takes h3 check, king g2, bishop takes g4. Now, over the course of 3 moves, white, who was a piece up for a pawn, lost a piece and 2 pawns. So material favors black. Black is up by 2 pawns, as far as I can see. But the more worrisome fact is that the white king is wide open. However, the knight on h3 is also slightly weak, so in this position I would play king takes bishop on f3 with no fear, and then go after the knight with rook h1 if I can. So yeah, there are no principles to playing such positions. It's basically just defending. Okay, black makes a right call by escaping with the knight while offering the exchange, which favors him now that he's 2 pawns up. Now it's gonna be a rough struggle for survival. The king on f3 is slightly not slightly, I would say it's quite misplaced, but it's not in real danger yet because you can retreat to e2 at this point. You can either play rook g1 and attack the queen and only then retreat after the queen moves. So rook g1. Attacking the queen on g5, and now, well, we have to keep making good moves. So in this point I would recommend just noticing the threat. So obviously black is checking the white king. You have to bring it back. I would recommend moving forward with the pieces, but the king has to move backwards if possible, if it's closer to the center. I guess there's no need to explain why we want the king to hide. King g2. c5, that's a really good move by black. He wants to open up the position for his rook, and then he can bring the rook to the attack. It's called a rook lift. You can just pull it up, for example, all the way from c8 to c5, and then from c5 to g5, and join the attack. Another option for black is rook f to d8, followed by rook d5, followed by rook g5 check. And in general, I would recommend black to develop the last piece on f8 rather than waste time. But okay, now Hutch improved his rook to an open file with tempo on the queen. That's good. Queen g5 check. King f1 is called for. The king has to hide. And then I predict that, oh, king f3. That's an adventurous approach. C takes d4. Now black is opening the center. E takes d4. Queen d5 check. Now, if I were playing white, I would play queen e4, offering the trade of queens. That way, at least my king in the center will be active instead of, let's call it, endangered. The king is going for a trip. Now a good move for black would be to farther open up the center with e6, e5, and only then bring his rook. But rook fd8, as mentioned before, is very good as well. Black blundered a piece in the opening, but after that he played absolutely brilliant chess. Rook d1, defending the main threat, but I'm not sure if it works, because now if white will recapture with a rook, then black has rook f e8 check. King d3 is a good call. Queen b3 is another good move. And now black is going to probably checkmate in the coming moves. If king d2, then there is rook c2 or queen c2 mate. And if king goes forward, then the black rook will join the attack. So white resigned. And now we'll see what Hutch has to say.
That got so out of control so fast for me.
Yeah. Now there comes the really painful part, where you have to probably figure out what went wrong.
I got a little too frisky with my king, I know that.
Yeah.
If I had to guess, I would say that, like, so what, the first, like, blunder was the pushing the g-pawn on g4, trying to fork the bishop and the knight.
Yeah.
I didn't even think about that check. I don't know why I didn't think about that. That was a stupid move. But then I think, like, the move after that got me in trouble was moving my king up at some point. Where was that?
I have a question. Do you see the move 15 knight takes f4 where he grabbed your bishop?
Yeah.
Did you notice something else that you could have done?
Instead of
Queen e1.
Oh, why didn't I take the piece? What was I doing? Why didn't I take that? You just threw me off, I think. I really don't have an explanation for that. That's just a blunder.
Yeah, it happens to me sometimes as well in some calculations that I see an option in one variation and then at some point in the future then I forget it's possible. Obviously the bishop was protected 2 moves ago when you played h3.
That was a silly game of blunders. Let's try and...
Yeah, but before you restart another game, I want to mention just 2 quick things. It's very subtle to tell the difference, but I mean, I'll let you be the judge. So there are 2 things that I want, 2 principles, so to speak. One is that generally you want to move forward whenever possible. So the move, for example, Queen e2 from c4 to e2 was slightly passive. And even though it's not a mistake for itself,
which move was this now? Say that again.
Move 13 for white. After b5, you played queen c4 to e2, retreating the queen.
Yeah.
So this was like the beginning of the issues for white. Even though it's not a mistake for itself, it's a step in the wrong direction because you want to move forward when possible. And
would you do me just the smallest favor and go into the user settings in Discord?
Yes.
And then go to voice and video, where it says input sensitivity. Do you see the where it says app settings and then voice and video on the left side there?
Yeah, voice.
Yeah, are you in that?
Yeah.
Are you in that
input volume or output?
No. The input sensitivity. Do you have it? Do you have automatically determined input sensitivity checked, or do you have that little what does that say right there? Is it a solid green line, or is it a line that moves whenever you speak?
Well, not sure if I pressed the right place. On app settings, voice, yeah?
Yeah, voice and video.
Oh, I see. It goes green like when I speak, yeah. Automatically determine input sensitivity. It's checked.
Okay, will you uncheck that and then drop the threshold down to like -94?
Sure.
Because it's cutting your voice off sometimes, and it's because of that setting, I think.
All right, no problem. Done.
Yeah, there you go. So that should help it. If it doesn't chat, then let me know.
Okay.
So yeah, you think I should work? So instead of that move, should I have gone like queen to c6 instead, or?
Yes, or queen takes c7, even better.
Oh yeah, I didn't even. Yeah, I noticed that too later on that pawn was hanging, and I let it I let it slide.
Not only that it was hanging, it's actually running away from the threat with tempo because you are threatening to exchange queens while being a piece up.
Yeah.
And the second remark, so the first one was to move forward at all times if it doesn't cost you anything. And the second one is kind of the opposite. So you don't want to move forward in a too aggressive manner when you can do simple things instead. So the move g4 was opening up your king, yeah? So you want to move forward in a very orthodox way if possible. So making subtle moves to bring your rooks to the open files, etc.
So instead of that move, what would you? So you maybe rook to c1 or rook a to c1.
So were you asking yourself the questions in your head, hearing my voice?
I'm not gonna lie, I wasn't. I thought it was gonna be easy.
Yeah, me too. After he blundered the piece, but you know that's there is a famous saying that the most difficult positions to win in chess are won positions.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, that makes sense.
and even today there was the World Cup, and like two world-class players in the top 5 didn't manage to win a completely winning position against each other in 2 different games. And the same time control like we're playing now, so it's far from obvious.
So grandmasters bleed, just like Patzers, huh?
Yeah, super grandmasters, I would say. I'm nowhere near these people.
Right.
So instead of so let's just go back to this moment again after 14 rook c8 when you play g4. Instead of playing g4, you want to ask yourself what is his next move, what is his threat.
So yeah, he was threatening my bishop.
Yes.
And I did not respect him. So probably bishop to h2 probably would have been the best, huh?
Exactly. And it's good for him to exchange the knight for the bishop, but also it kind of ruins your pawn structure after you capture with the e-pawn. So I would go even one move backwards when you played h3, yeah? Because you also allowed knight takes f4 then. And I would say that even more precise is to go back with the bishop to g3, so you can recapture with the h-pawn.
Right, yeah, okay.
Okay.
Yep, all this makes sense.
So 2 questions on every single move. It's very important to be disciplined, even though it's easier said than done.
What is my opponent's threat, and are there any pieces that I can improve?
Which piece doesn't work, yeah.
Right, okay.
So just notice more than anything else that you don't want to move the same piece twice, unprovoked, before developing all your pieces.
Right, yeah. Okay. Alright, I'm gonna try and remember those questions it's harder for me to remember it in the opening because I feel like I'm on autopilot a lot of the times, and then I don't remember to like switch that instinct on when it transfers to when it switches to becoming the middle game. I need to remember to really be asking myself those questions so I can avoid dumb moves like the ones that I did that last game. All right, let's get into another game here. I am in a game right now, so you should be able to see that.
Okay.
Yep. All right, putting the headphones down.
So d4 knight f6 on the board. Hutch is playing J. Rivera, 19. g6. So now black has 2 main options after knight c3, either bishop g7 or d5. d5 will be referred to as the Grunfeld defense, and it's my favorite defense with black. Bishop g7 that was played is the King's Indian defense. e4. So the idea of the King's Indian defense, they kind of give up the center, but they want to play in a more flexible manner, prioritizing development first. And Hutch likes his 4 pawns attack, and this is a very aggressive approach, and very valid as well to exploit the fact that black gave up the center. Now there is no need to be over aggressive. You have 4 pawns in the center, just develop your pieces. So knight f3, In general, you put your knights and bishops in the center, so the 16 central squares that I'm drawing on my own side of the stream are where you put your light pieces, bishops and knights. So you can see the square that I'm marking, and that's where you want to put these pieces. So next I would play bishop d3 if black lets me, and then castle short, followed by bishop e3 and developing the queen. I forgot to mention also that there's a survey regarding the Hutch Special on the description for most of my recent videos, including this one. And a link will be posted to the actual product in the description of this current video that I'm making. And perhaps Hutch will put a link as well. We'll see. And it will be active most probably tomorrow, because I need to prepare it. As for the game, rook e8 is preparing e5. Now bishop d3, finishing the development, and it's tempting to gain a pawn, and it's probably also a good idea, but you have to be precise. Because if you take first with the f pawn, after d takes e5, knight takes e5, there goes queen takes d4. So I'm not sure if everyone can follow, but now that we'll see it over the board, d takes e5, knight takes e5, queen takes d4, and black is just fine. So the correct way to play was to take with the d pawn, and then after d takes e5, knight takes e5, and the f4 pawn is protecting the knight. So that was a slight inaccuracy, but now there is it's a very important moment nevertheless. So white is not gaining a pawn, and he found the right move. You want to push and maintain the strong center. So I think this is a really nice position to have with white. You have 3 pawns in the center. The only potential problem is that because white pawns are all on light squares, then the dark squares are kind of weak, and you don't want to allow black to play too aggressively on the dark squares. So that means, strategically speaking, you don't want to exchange your dark squared bishop on c1 with a knight, because then there would be no one to counter the bishop on g7, and it will become a monster. So what I would do here with white is to play bishop to e3 on the next move, and only then to castle, or maybe even play h3 first to avoid any knight g4 ideas. So black plays c6, trying to put pressure on the center, but white center is quite strong, so there is no real threat. If black captures, white just recaptures with the c pawn, and he's good to go. So I would recommend for white to either castle or play bishop e3. In general, if you're not sure, it's better to do it in the right order, and it is to develop your light pieces in the direction where you castle, and only then develop the rest of the pieces. So the safe order is to simply castle now on the king side, and react to black's moves, and if he has no threat, simply finish the development. So Hutch has to ask himself now, what is my opponent threatening? The answer is the always tricky answer: nothing. So he continues the development. That's very good. Now, if black captures on d5 with the pawn, you want to recapture towards the center with the c pawn. So here black has to figure out how to proceed. I would recommend black to develop his knight, and the most active square is probably a6 at this point, aiming to reach c5, but yeah, it's not easy to suggest anything else, because c takes d5, even though it looks tempting, it kind of breaks the tension, and we spoke about it in the past. When there is tension in the center or somewhere else, either between pawns or pieces, the first one to break the tension usually gives up something. And even though I cannot really say what exactly black gave up, it's a principle that is true 95% of the time. So, and there is nothing to gain from forcing the recapture at this particular moment in time. So I wouldn't have done it with black. So okay, I can say at least that white's bishop on d3 is now open, and well, the c file is open, which should favor white at this point because he's closer to put a rook. He has a lead in development, so he can put a rook on the c file faster than black. At this point, it's very important to be patient as white and ask yourself, what is my opponent threatening? Because statically speaking, white is better. He has a protected pass pawn on d5 and better pieces overall. The bishop on g7 is kind of blocked by his own pawn on e5. Black played a5, which is kind of a decent move, but once again it withholds the development. I prefer to develop as quickly as possible. So again, Hutch has to ask himself, what is my opponent threatening? The answer is nothing. And then, which piece doesn't work? The bishop on c1. So we develop it. And as we mentioned earlier, with the central square I drew earlier, and I'm drawing once again. You want to put your pieces in the center. Bishop g5 is a nice move, very active, but I wouldn't say that it's too necessary, because by putting it on e3 you control many dark squares that are quite important. However, after bishop e3 black had knight g4, so maybe bishop g5 is actually more precise. Now black is going to win a pawn with queen b6 check, forking the king and the pawn on b2, but I wouldn't rush to take it if I was black. So obviously the move now is king h1. Rook f2 might be tempting to protect the pawn, but then knight g4 is quite painful, winning at least an exchange. So white has to play king h1, there is no other choice. And if black captures on b2, then there is some potential for white to cause mayhem with moves like knight b5, threatening many different things. And I'm kind of hoping we will see it over the board taking place. But a general rule is that if you don't have a lead in development, you should think twice at least before going after pawns. Pawn grabbing is not recommended in general. You want to play for initiative, but if your opponent has a lead in development, then it's forbidden. By all means, do not go after pawns. And I don't need to calculate queen takes b2, even though in some cases computer would say it's fine. Still, from human perspective, I wouldn't recommend going after pawns in almost any situation. And it's not about seeing how to punish black, it's just that the principles are in white's favor. White was developing, black wasn't, and black is probably sensing the danger because he didn't capture the pawn. And now Hutch has to ask himself once again, what is my opponent threatening? The answer is, you can try to answer for yourself first, actually, but it has something to do with the knight and queen collaborating on the f2 square. So knight f2 check, forking the king and queen and winning an exchange. So white has to protect from this threat, and there is a very elegant move that offers multiple functions. Firstly, you want to develop your queen in general, regardless to the threats. And black has two threats. One is to take on b2, the other one is to fork on f2. So Hutch made the right call and protected both threats from both threats while developing his queen. That's developing with tempo, so to speak. Or I would say protecting while developing. It's always nicer than protecting passively. So in this position, black has to seriously think about the way he was playing so far and realize he's in slight trouble because he still has to finish his development. Technically, white already finished his development because at least according to definitions I learned as a kid, when the rooks are connected, that's when the opening phase is finished. And technically you can still put the rooks in open files, and it's recommended, but white basically finished his development. Black is 2 moves away, and there is no justification for further delay. So I would highly recommend black to take care of his bishop and knight. At this point, black is thinking, and it's a sign that he probably realizes that he kind of got himself into trouble. It's not too big of danger, let's say, when you realize that you need to minimize the damage, I would say. But it's a very hard thing to do psychologically. When you're worse, to be humble and just kind of accept the fact that your opponent can put pressure on you and you just have to survive. So many people start to play actively or aggressively in such situations, and that would be a mistake. What you want to do is to finish your development. Knight to a6 followed by bishop to d7. h6 makes some sense. It's not a bad move, and it's forcing white's reply. So there's no other option. White has to retreat the bishop to the only square that's not costing him anything. At this point, I'm wondering what Hutch is considering. There is another option, but I'm not sure if it's good. Knight to a4, like an intermediate move attacking the queen. I don't like putting my knights on the rim. So bishop h4, very logical response. And now white's follow-up is most probably going to be h3. Once again, it's kind of a developing move. You want to create a window for your king, a luft, in case of a back rank mate in the future. But you don't only do it as for like just to develop, you also have a tempo on the knight, kind of asking it to go back, because it's a bit annoying on this square, taking away two important squares from white's pieces, e3 and f2. So the knight on g4 has some control on the dark squares, as I mentioned before, which are quite weak. So you wanna kick it away. But first, maybe it's a good idea for white to ask himself, what is my opponent threatening? And the answer, as usual, is nothing. So which piece doesn't work? h3 is one option, so you create a luft with tempo, and another option is to answer the question which piece doesn't work with the only piece that didn't move so far, the rook on a1. And you can think for yourself which is the best square for the rook. If you said the open file, then you're right. Rook a1 to c1 is probably a good square for the rook. And please notice that the rook on f1 is already on an open file, even though all it ever did was to castle. So I really like having the f file open, because then I castle into an open file and I kind of save it tempo. And so rook e1 is a good move because developing the rook is preferable over not developing it. But it's, according to the principles I mentioned, it's not the square with the most potential for the rook. However, it kind of takes away the e3 square from the knight. So I guess it prepares h3. So it's a safe move, safer than rook c1, but I think slightly less accurate. And I'm being very, let's call it rough, when I judge the moves. I'm setting them to the highest of standards that I can. So knight c5, once again, what is my opponent threatening? He wants to capture the bishop on d3, which is good for him in itself to trade the knight for the bishop. But not only that, he's also going to capture the pawn on b2 afterwards. Please notice the queen on d2 protects the pawn on b2. So, and it also protects the bishop on d3. So it can't protect both at the same time if black captures one of them. So a good move for white is to address this threat by moving the bishop, and as I mentioned earlier, hoping Hutch remembers, is to move forward is preferable over moving backwards. And he found the right idea, moving the bishop to a central square which is within the same 16 squares that I drew earlier, which is where you want to put your light pieces. So bishop c4 is a good move, and now the rook on e1 kind of looks nice because it protects e4. And yeah, black plays king h7. I don't know why he doesn't want to finish his development, but I mean, it's not a bad move. It's very hard to punish black for his inaccuracies, but there is no doubt that not developing is something that's not recommended when you're underdeveloped, or at any case. So h3, correct. As I mentioned, it's the last move of the opening. After finishing my development, I always like to create a loft for the king, and this one comes with tempo and kicks away the most annoying piece that black currently has. And now he has to move backwards from g4 to f6. and white will follow up with the same questions. What is my opponent threatening? Nothing. By the way, thanks to the rook on e1, there is no threat on e4. So rook e1 turned out to be a good move. So I kind of take back what I said about it earlier. It probably wasn't the best in the position, but it was definitely good. So bishop f2. And the second question, after I realized black has no threat, I'm asking myself which piece doesn't work, and Hutch answered correctly. Bishop on h4 was not placed ideally. It was far away from the center. There was no pin anymore on the h4 d8 diagonal, so it's time to bring it back to the center. And now there is actually a pin. Quite a painful one as well, because white is threatening a very nasty move. If he could play again, I wonder if you can see it. The move is knight a4, and the point is that you attack both the queen and the knight simultaneously, and if black captures the knight, then his queen will be lost because of the pin. So knight a4 essentially wins a piece on the next move, and black has to address it. I would recommend black to prevent it while developing with bishop d7, covering the a4 square, but he didn't find it, and he made a defensive move, knight fd7, which also protects from the threat, but still is a bit suspicious, because you move backwards for a start, and secondly, and more importantly, you block your own bishop, so you will have trouble finishing your development later on. So now white has to ask himself the same question. What is my opponent threatening? The answer, as usual, is nothing. And then, which piece doesn't work? Once again. So I would say all the pieces are good, but the rook on e1 once again is slightly misplaced at this point of the game. So I would choose to improve it by bringing it to the c file, which is the only remaining open file that white has. An open file, for those who don't know, by definition, is a file where there is no pawn of your color. I would say the color that you're playing with. So if you have the white pieces, then pawn on c2, pawn on f2 are missing. There are no pawns on these files. You put your rooks on these particular files. And there is a slight difference between an open file and a semi-open file. But for this, at this point, I don't really want to go into these kind of, let's call it subtleties. Not because it's too complicated, but because it has nothing to, we have nothing to gain from making this difference. In both cases, we want to put our rooks in a file where we have no pawns. And for those who are still curious, a semi-open file is a file where we don't have a pawn, but the opponent does. For example, the F file is a semi-open file, and the C file is completely open. Okay, white played bishop b5, reinforcing the bishop c4 to b5, reinforcing the pin, I would say. Black kind of ran away from the pin. There is no real threat that white can unleash in this position, but there is another way to play other than rook c1 that makes some sense. Once again, when asking ourselves which piece doesn't work, we can bring the knight from f3 all the way to c4. So the route will be knight from f3 to d2 to c4, but the queen is in the way. So moving the queen, for example, to e2, followed by knight d2 and knight c4, is quite tempting, I would say. So Georgi on my stream is asking how much is the cost for the 2 hours Hutch Special product that I mentioned earlier. The cost will be $150 for 2 hours of live stream. And it will be at the same exact format that we had the tournament that I played with Hutch the first 3 or 4 times we streamed. You get to experience the exact same thing from his point of view. Okay, bishop e3 on the board. It's a good idea to improve your pieces, so even though it's not the most aggressive move in the position, or active I would say, it still puts pressure on black because it asks him, what do you want to do? I'm moving my pieces forward, you cannot develop. How are you gonna follow up? And maybe it sets the ground for future queen f2, queen h4, and bringing the queen to the king side with some threats. So I like bishop e3. My intuition was to play queen e2 or knight d2, knight c4, or maybe rook c1. So I was attracted to the open file on the queen side, but playing on the king side makes a lot of sense as well, because white has 4 pieces that are aiming the king side: queen, bishop, knight and rook. And black doesn't have that many pieces on the king side, so it makes sense to play on that side of the board. And in general, when deciding on which side of the board to play, it's a good idea to look at the ratio between the pieces. So knight h4, a very interesting move, preparing rook takes f7, so it creates a threat. The only thing I don't like about it is that after black protects, the knight on h4 is slightly misplaced. So I would much prefer to play knight d2 with tempo on f7, followed by knight c4. Okay, rook e7 protects from the threat. 4 minutes left for both sides. Now the logical follow-up would be to double the rooks on the f file. So maybe rook f2 followed by rook e to f1. Once again, answering the same question, which piece doesn't work? And the rook on e1 would be the answer. So I want to put it on the open file, open f file, to follow through with the previous move, knight h4. It's very important in chess to be consistent. Even though earlier I wanted to put the rook on the c file, now that I said A, I must say B. Knight h4, you play on the king side, so you have to follow through on the king side. Otherwise, you kind of create chaos in your own camp. So bishop b7, finally black is about to finish his development. Kudos to Hutch for doubling the rooks. It's a good move. And now rook f2. I assume the logical follow-up is rook ef1. Not only improving the rook, but also has the tempo on the f7 square, because it will attack it twice. Nice. 3 minutes 27 seconds versus 4 minutes and 19 seconds. It's getting tight on the clock. Now, once again, what is the opponent threatening? Nothing. Which piece doesn't work? I would say the white queen is slightly out of the game, so I would play queen e2 followed by queen g4, bringing it farther into the king side. Another strategy is to improve the knight from c3, so maybe moving the bishop from b5, let's say for example bishop c4, followed by knight b5 later, attacking the queen and trying to push black's pieces backwards. So queen e2, nice. The move I was suggesting. The logical follow-up is queen to g4. I don't know exactly if it achieves anything, but it makes sense to put as many pieces next to the black king, and maybe some threats will be generated just by mere statistics. When pieces are threatening in different directions, some threats will appear. Sounds very logical when I say it like this. When you're threatening, there are threats. Bishop c8. Okay, this is a move that goes backwards, and I'm not a big fan of what black did. As white, I would actually consider to do something slightly cunning, I would say. Suddenly playing on the queen side, a3 followed by b4, and the point is not necessarily to attack, but like to continue to play on the queen side, but just to push the knight away from the juicy c5 square, and then proceed playing on both wings depending on what black does. Currently, both players have all their pieces, or most of their pieces, on the king side, and no threats overall, so it's time to play on the queen side, where white is stronger at this point. He has 4 pieces kind of looking in this direction. For those who don't know, the queen side is the left side of the board, the left half. And nice! Just as I was saying it, Hutch goes for rook c1. So far, it's a really nice game, in my opinion. And I'm not even sure what remarks to give him after the game, other than the fact that the knight on h4 is slightly misplaced. Well, it's getting slightly tense for white with the time situation. 1 minute and 35 seconds with a 10-second increment. At this point, I'm glad we decided not to play 10+0. So black is thinking. He also doesn't know exactly what he wants to do. So I'm not even sure what black has in mind. But if I were white, actually my next couple of moves would be... Oh, whoops. Whoops. Something happened. Sorry about that. I was apologizing to my own viewers because my screen suddenly changed everything. So, back to the game. If I were white, I would play knight from h4 to f3 to d2 to c4. But black has created a threat on e4, so there are more pressing issues. Both knights are attacking e4. We have to protect. And there is no easy way to protect it, so either bishop retreats to d3, which I don't really like, or bishop from e3 retreats to d2, which I also don't really like. So maybe queen c4 is the most active way to defend. I want to move forward. Queen c4, queen f3. Okay, but bishop d3 was played. Both players are entering time pressure zone. Bishop d7, a good move by black. Now I would play with the bishop on d3 backwards, not to allow black to capture it. So bishop from d3 to b1, followed by knight f3, knight d2, knight c4. Now a3 is slightly less pleasant for white because it allows black to put his knight from c5 on b3, or even play a4 like this and fix the white pawns on dark squares. So the b3 square becomes very powerful. It's gonna be difficult to remove the knight from it. So a3 was not the best, but finally the knight comes back to the game. Knight f3. Let's hope to see knight d2 coming up next. And in the time pressure, I predict a lot of let's say unbalanced things can take place. Unnecessary events. So black is thinking. I wouldn't recommend thinking for half of your time at such a moment. It's not like there is too much to calculate, and he plays passively. So now knight d2, nice. So Hutch finally is improving his knight to the max. Knight from d2 will come to c4 with tempo on the queen. And then I would actually recommend to retreat the bishop from d3 if possible. Or even more importantly, bring the rook back from the c file to the f file. Okay, but black played f5, so now there is no time to hesitate. You have to play as actively as you can. And moving the knight to the center with tempo on the queen is definitely active. Now the queen has to move backwards, or to f6 actually. In both cases I would recommend white to capture an f5 one way or another. Oh, but black played queen c7 and just blundered a fork which Hutch masterfully exploited. Played it instantly. I guess he saw it in advance. Yes, and now there's still time to think, no need to rush. Black has no real threat, so now that you're a rook up, you wanna move your pieces to better squares. And this is one of them. And capturing a pawn at the same time, so why not? Okay, f4. A good move would be to run away with the bishop with tempo, so bishop takes c5. And after queen c5 there is a nasty follow-up. Knight takes d7. Taking a piece and forking the queen and rook. And after this move, white is going to lead by so many pieces. 2 rooks to be exact, and black resigned. So wow.
Got a little sweaty at the end there, huh?
Yeah, me too. That was a roller coaster.
That was a good game. I like that one.
Yeah. It had a bit of everything.
What stood out to you about that game? What are some moves that I could have done differently?
I pointed out that I'm not even sure what remarks to provide, because you both made so many good moves. I mean, there are concrete things here and there, but from the strategic point of view, I would say that the main thing to notice that you have the right ideas, the right principles in your mind, but not necessarily the best execution. So, for example, move 22 with white after b6. That was probably the most inaccurate move I can point out. You played knight h4.
I was kind of struggling with, like, I wanted to force something on the king side there, and I figured I would double up my rooks over there.
Yes, so
but then I just felt like I just kind of got stuck because there wasn't really an opening to do anything with the doubled rooks.
Yes.
So yeah.
So we don't really want to force stuff, as far as I can tell. The best idea is to just improve our pieces, preferably with tempi, if possible. And you spotted that the f1 rook can attack the f7 square, which is a really good thing to exploit. But you want to exploit this tempo to improve your knight rather than to put it on the edge of the board. So can you tell me which square can be better for the knight on f3? Actually, you did it later on in the game.
You mean something like knight to h2 with the idea of going to g4?
In the game, you found the right maneuver with the knight, and it's when you did it, you actually won the game right afterwards. So you want to improve the knight. So usually, improving light pieces means bringing them to the center.
So where did I go? I'm confused. Where could he even go right now? He doesn't even. Can't go to d4. Oh, you mean like? Oh, okay. Wait, do you mean knight to g1 and then knight to e2? I'm confused.
It's slightly challenging to find it from here because your queen is on d2. But if you imagine which square is the best for the knight, you can just, if you could just take this knight, yeah, and just plant it somewhere else on the board, where would you put it? From f3.
From f3, yeah. I mean, you mean move my queen and then knight to d2? I don't
Followed by?
Oh, okay, yeah, c4, knight to c4.
Exactly. The c4 is a very nice square for the knight. And, well, it takes some practice to spot these kind of things. But when you ask the questions and you ask yourself which piece doesn't work, and you say the knight on f3, and you start searching for a square, you immediately spot that if you just put it on c4, it will be very, very nice for the knight.
And so does that mean that my rook moves were kind of pointless before that? Could I have maybe left the rook on
well,
a1 and got into that first? Or?
It's a double-edged decision. I mean, the rook move was right because it's a developing move. I would always recommend developing the rook before doing other things, but this was the critical moment, and had you moved your queen, for example, to f2, also eyeing the h4 square with the queen, and then followed with knight d2, knight c4, I would say you would have a very big advantage, strategically speaking. And yeah, that's the key moment. And just remember, when you ask yourself which piece doesn't work, you just have to, when you have a piece in mind, there is no wrong answer. When you find a piece you can improve, you just find the best way to improve it, and you go for it.
Okay, yeah. What did you think of the bishop to b5 move? I thought that was a very tall move. Because I had you in my head, like, I was thinking about pulling the bishop back, and I was like, I feel like I should be pushing forward with that guy.
Yeah, it was a really... I mean, even the move earlier, like 3 moves ago, move 17 with white, when you ran away with the bishop, you went to c4, and this is where I felt like you were already applying what I was telling you a few minutes earlier. You realized that you want to move the bishop, and you moved it forward because of that, and then you did it again. So all you need to do is hear the comments in your mind as you're looking over the game and apply it. And I think all the people can apply very easily once they figure out what went wrong in the previous game. So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so we can see clear improvement already in this game. So just notice that when you want to improve the worst placed piece, that you want to put it on the best possible square.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let me blow my nose real quick, and then I got time for one more game here.
Okay.
I'll be right back. 1 second.
So I don't know if the viewers can still hear me or not, but I know on my side of the stream they can. So I want to mention that when you're analyzing your games, you don't necessarily need someone like me, or it's obviously nice to have a professional to give you remarks, but everyone can and should analyze their own games if they want to improve. And even if you have a trainer, it's a good idea to look over your games on your own and trying to figure out things on your own, and only then go over it with them. So you can all improve your chess with this idea of looking over the moves from your games and rethinking all your decisions. And actually, if you need the tool, the best thing I can say is that you follow the same two questions and try to realize when you could have answered them better, or just simply forgot to ask them or failed to answer.
Okay, I'm in a game now, just so you know.
Nice. So we have a new game. Knight f3 on the board. Hutch is playing d5. In the opening, you want to take over the center with pawns, followed by developing your pieces and castling as quickly as possible. d4. The logical follow-up for black is to develop the knight from g8, knight to f6, and then there's always a question whether or not we want to develop the bishop from c8 first or play e6, but fianchetto is also nice. Knight bd2, knight f6. The fianchetto, by the way, is when black plays g6 and bishop g7. Okay, c4 on the board. Now the logical follow-up is to simply castle, but well, black is on choice. b6 is a good developing move, but I wouldn't say it's the best order, because you want to castle before taking care of the other light pieces, the bishop on c8 and the knight on b8. And in general, I would recommend developing the knights first and only then choosing where you want to put your bishop. So the idea of playing b6 is slightly committal at this point. And in the opening, when you're more flexible, it's usually a good sign. So bishop b7, still no harm, no foul. A good follow-up for black would be to castle short. I would say both players have an interesting position. No one made any serious mistakes, even though both played slightly less actively than they could. Black could have castled and played c5, and white could have put his knight on c3 rather than d2. C takes d5. Now it's highly recommended to recapture, but with what piece? Probably with the bishop is a good idea. Queen takes d5 would be a blunder because of bishop c4, followed by bishop takes f7 check. Bishop d5, bishop c4. Now it's an important moment to ask what is white threatening, and when you realize the answer is nothing, the bishop is protected, you can continue the development by castling. Okay, bishop takes c4 is a slight inaccuracy, I would say, because just like I mentioned earlier, it breaks the tension. There was a tension between the pieces, and black gave up something by capturing. And for white, it would have been better to take with the knight and develop the bishop. And knight d7 is a good move, but I would rather castle first. castles. Now black should castle. Finish his development. A good follow-up for black would be c7 to c5. And in fact, he's leading in development because the bishop on c1 has a rough time developing. So white rightfully tries to play b3 and bishop b2. But now after c5 and rook c8, I would say black is slightly more active. c5. You're leading in development, you want to open up the center. e6 is another good move, but it has to be followed with c5. Pawn breaks are very important in chess. I assume the reason Hutch played e6 is because he wants to prevent d4 to d5. But there was no need to prevent it, because had black played c5 and white answered with d5, black would have had the nasty knight takes d5 followed by bishop takes the rook, the hanging rook on a1. Bishop a3 attacks the rook. Now black is on choice. He can play c5 and block, which I think is a good move, or move the rook to e8, which is probably less precise because now white has a nasty idea of queen c6 blocking the c7 pawn. Rook c1, attacking the pawn on c7. And the good way to defend it is by attacking c7, c5. Even though now I'm not sure if black can retrieve the pawn. It might be too late to play c5, so maybe rook c8 is a bit more conservative. Rook c2. Now if c5, white is ready with rook fc1, tripling on the c file and preventing c takes d4 because of the pin. So maybe slightly more accurate for black was to play c6, but it's a bit passive. So I like c5. I like what Hutch did, but I'm not sure how to follow through in case of rook c1. Fortunately, white did not play it. So after d takes c5 now, probably black should take with the knight, even though pawn takes is also nice. Now white should play rook fc1, once again with the pin on the c file. And then black has to be very careful because of the b4 threat, winning a piece. So maybe after rook fc1, if I were black, I would play a7, a5, keeping an eye on the b4 square. Okay, so Hutch, this is the critical moment. He has to ask himself, what is my opponent threatening? The threat is b3 to b4, winning a piece. Because if the knight goes away, queen takes c8. So the best way to prevent it is a7, a5. There might be other creative ways to prevent it, but I don't really see them as we speak. I mean, queen d5 might be possible, but nah, doesn't work. Queen d7, it's very complicated. a5 would be the best way to protect from b4. So at this point, that's a very critical moment for Hutch. White is slightly better, even if he finds a5, and well, the reason Black found himself under pressure is because he took his time from developing earlier. Just want to point it out. It started with this b6 move, which was slightly slow, then continued with bishop takes c4, which was giving up, releasing the tension, and here c5 was a great move to play, and here as well, but e6, rook e8 were too slow, so now White was in time to triple on the c file, and when we make mistakes, usually the punishment is not that we immediately lose, is that we get into a position where it becomes more and more difficult to find a way to handle the threats. So I'm not sure if everyone will understand what I mean by it, but even at the highest levels of chess, when you make a slight inaccuracy, the position can still be equal, but it's just that your tasks gradually increases in difficulty. And that's what happened here. So Black is probably still fine, but he has to find an only move, a7 to a5. Or play slightly inaccurately and move the rook from c8 if he doesn't see anything else. Rook b8 or rook a8, aiming to move the knight backwards and giving up a pawn in case White plays bishop takes c5. I'm watching Hutch on his side of the stream, and he looks incredibly focused. And he made the move I just mentioned, rook to b8. So he realized he had a problem to solve. He saw the threat, and that's the best way to address it that he could find, and it's a very decent way, giving up a pawn but maintaining some compensation because the bishop on g7 is quite strong. Now it's important not to tilt and ask yourself, what is the opponent threatening? The answer is queen from c5 to capture on a7. So I would probably ignore it. Play knight from f6 to d5 with the idea of knight b4 and opening up the bishop. So someone in Hutch chat is asking if he saw b4, why not play a5? That's a really good question, and I would say the reason is probably simpler than you think. He may have not seen it, and that happens a lot, even to professionals when they play. Not all the moves come to your mind. And thank you. And when the moves are being said out loud, then they seem obvious. That's also what happened to me today when I was watching the World Cup and these two amazing players, Arhenion and Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, were playing in the same time control as we see now. And they were making blunders according to the computer, and I thought it was very easy. But without the computer, I'm sure it's not easy if two of the best players in the world manage to mutually make these mistakes. So 95. What is white threatening? Capture the queen on d7. So probably queen to d7 was slightly inaccurate on the previous move. Not the most active way to protect the a7 pawn, but not that bad either. As I mentioned, when you make an inaccurate move, your punishment is that you need to be more accurate later on. So now black has to find queen to b7 if he doesn't want to find himself in slight trouble. Queen d8. Okay, that's a nice approach. You make an inaccuracy, you kind of admit the mistake. However, it kind of misses a fork. White has a chance to make a fork. Don't know if you can see it at this point, but if you spotted it, then kudos. It was knight to c6, attacking both the queen and the rook. But even though white captured the pawn instead, which is not the best, it raises up a question for black, because there is a further threat that can be missed. It's very easy to miss. Queen on a7 and knight on e5 both attack the f7 pawn, so black has to be careful and protect. And there are no easy ways to protect it, because if you play rook e7, white has this nasty queen takes b8 followed by rook c8 check, and trading pieces, thus coming closer to exploiting his two pawns lead. So I would say rook queen b8 is a deadly move that white has. I'm not sure if he will see it. If he doesn't, then it's still not so fun for black. Oh, but white just blundered, I think. Oh no, actually... Wait. Yes, he blundered. No, it didn't. The rook on c1 is protected. So this is confusing, because the knight on d2 is hanging, but I'm not sure if there is a way to capture it or not. Because if queen takes d2, then white has queen takes b8. And then white is winning an exchange. And if rook takes c7, white will not capture with the rook. He will probably capture with the queen, and then once again, I don't see how to exploit it. But there must be a way. Rook takes c7, queen takes c7, queen takes c7, rook takes c7, and then maybe knight d5, and then there is a double attack. Knight on d5 attacks the rook on c7, and the bishop on g7 attacks the knight on e5. So rook takes c7 is most probably a good move for black that can win some material, but it's very complicated. So here I guess some people found it a bit complicated, but Hutch made a move that's very similar in nature, but slightly less, I would say, difficult for white, because now that he played knight d5 in this particular order, it allows white to get away with rook takes e7, knight takes e7, and then the knight from e5 can retreat. So, and the usual queen takes b8 is still on the agenda. Queen takes b8, queen takes b8, rook c8 check. So, for those who didn't follow, it's queen takes rook on b8, queen takes queen, and rook drops to the c8 square, one square down with a check. So white decided to capture. Now black should most probably capture with the knight, because if it takes with the queen, there's queen takes b8. And now two of white's pieces are attacked, the knight on d2 and the knight on e5, but the knight on d2 is indirectly protected because the b8 rook is undefended. So in case, so knight c6 is a good move actually, because if queen takes d2, there is queen takes b8 check. And for those who find it difficult to follow, if queen from d8, if the queen takes the knight, then the white queen will take the black rook. So in this position, black is forced to play knight takes e6, white is forced to play rook takes e6, and rook a8, very nice move, forcing white to play queen to b7. Actually, there is another option for white. Rook to d6 is a funky tactical move that can be played now, rook d6, but I'm not sure if white will see it. The idea behind rook d6 is that both black pieces are unprotected if they capture the white counterpart. So after rook d6, if you take the queen, I take the queen. If you take the rook, I take the rook. So rook d6 is probably a very good move now. Queen b7 is the obvious reply if white will miss it, because it keeps an eye on the rook. So still indirectly protecting the knight. But black might have some ideas there. Even though I'm not sure, because if rook takes pawn on a2, then there is rook c8. Okay, so I guess we'll have to wait and see what white is doing. Queen c5. So white blundered. He allowed black to capture the knight. And I'm curious to see Hutch and his facial expression when he sees this move. He seems relieved, but cold-blooded as usual. Yeah. No response almost. I would be like jumping on the chair, smiling and like dancing. But he's still super focused. Nice. That was a very tenacious defense. 2 pawns down, keeping it together for as long as possible, and then the first chance you get, striking. that knight on d2. And the bishop on g7 is still alive. Of course, the game is not over yet, but the difficult part is probably behind us. Now it's a matter of technique. So, which is still very difficult. Don't let me mislead you. So, I would say Black has to notice White's threats on every single move, and if he has no threats, in this case, it's even more important than ever before. Improve your pieces with every single move. And the first improvement that's on the agenda is to create a loft for the king, h7, h5 if possible. And in this position, rook c8 check. The only move is rook takes c8, queen takes c8, bishop f8, block the check. And now there is a double attack, either queen d1 checkmate or queen takes a2, and white found a way to protect from both. However, if black finds the right sequence, he can still win the pawn. Queen c1 check, queen f1, and then queen to b2. And the pawn on a2 will be lost. Another interesting option is to simply exchange the queens, but I am not a big fan because the two pass pawns are slightly annoying. So queen b2 immediately is also good, but kind of loses the tempo. Because now white is in time to play g3, as you can see. So I would play queen a3 if I were black in this position and offer the exchange of queens. Queen b1 check. Okay, maybe he wants to follow with queen e4 check. Nice. And then a good move would be h7, h5 as I mentioned. Simply creating more space for the king to run away in case needed. And also implies that he wants to attack with h4 and h3. Okay, queen b4 is also nice, blockading, but black is not going to win this position by simply waiting, and this clock is running out of time, so he should play the technical moves as quickly as possible. So h7, h5, then maybe king g7, then putting the bishop from f8 on a better square, possibly c5, and offering the trade of queens on a3. Okay, white made a mistake. He offers the trade of queens even at the cost of doubling his pawns, and there is no way he will survive it if black is playing accurately. So good. And now the only task is to bring the king. There is no need to be stressed out about this pawn. Just bring the king over. King f8, king e7, and so on. Bishop b4 was slightly... No, it was fine. I mean, king c4. Now you just have to play bishop e1. Bishop e1, attack the pawn on f2. Followed by king c6. And sooner or later, white will be in Zugzwang. Which means that black will be able to penetrate his position. So, bishop e1, f3 is the move I would expect to see. f4 is slightly less accurate because now black can win a pawn by force. He missed it. King c6 is still good, but in general white wants his pawns on light squares so that the bishop cannot attack them. And h3, okay, white just blundered the pawn. Bishop takes g3 and it's game over. All that black has left to do is to create a pass pawn on the king side, which is the left side of the board right now because we are looking from black's perspective. Okay, Hutch missed the fact that he could take the pawn or didn't realize that the a pawn is not that dangerous, and white took back his mistake. Now it's very important not to let the white king to get to the king side. So I like the move f6 by black. Excuse me. It's quite late in Israel right now, so king d4. Now white is threatening king to e5, so you really want to prevent it if possible. I like the idea of king c6 and then replying to king e5 with bishop c3 check, but it's slightly sophisticated. So f6, a good move in general. Now an interesting move for white will be g5. g5 is provoking black to allow the white king into the position. And e4 on the board. Now a good idea would be to check the white king. Bishop g3 is also nice, provided you play bishop e5 check. But I don't like provoking f5, because f5 is a good move for white to trade pawns. Still, black should be winning, because after f5 you can completely blockade the white pawn structure if you find it. You can play g takes f5 followed by e5 check and then protect the pawns from h4. The bishop from h4 can protect everything. Bishop e5 is slightly less accurate because it blocks the e pawn. No, but it's still completely fine, because if you go e takes f5 and regardless of how white recaptures, you go g5. It's very important not to exchange both pawns, even though it would still be winning. The winning side wants to prevent exchanging pawns in order to maintain the highest winning chances possible. So e takes f5 is called for because you're gonna exchange this pawn either way, so might as well do it now and leave the g pawn for later so you can decide what to do with it. E takes f5 must be played. Nice. Now white can either take with the e or g pawn. In both cases I think both moves, capturing or g5, are winning, but g5 is more accurate, more principled I would say, because it doesn't exchange the pawns. And then the plan is quite obvious. After g5 I just want to play king a5, collect the pawns on the queen side, and then come with the queen to the king, with the king back all the way to the king side. So now g5, as I said, would be the correct move, even though I'm sure gf is also winning. Both are winning as long as you don't allow the white king to just cause you trouble for free. So g5, white will play. Okay, gf is also good, but now the most precise move after gf is probably black to play h5, followed by h4 I think. But I'm not sure. Actually, this might be even better, because the h6 pawn is very far away, so it will take the white king quite long to get to it. So, and in fact, black can even play bishop f4, bishop g5. Interesting. And protect all of his pawns. So bishop f4 is probably the cleanest way. Bishop f4 right now, so that after king e6 you get bishop g5, Now you cannot prevent losing the h-pawn, but I think black should still be in time. Let's calculate. King a3, king f7, king a2, king g6, king b3, king h6, king c4, king g6. King d5, h4. It's not so easy. No, king d5, h4, king d6, h5, king e7, h6. No. Maybe the win is not even available anymore. Yeah, I guess g takes f5 was making it more difficult than it should have been. And now, yeah, now it's no longer winning. King a3, king f7. Oh wait, maybe I can play king b5 right now. King f7, king c5, king g6. No, there's no time. Such a pity. So in this endgame, there is no choice for both sides. G takes f5 was the critical mistake, practically, but the objectively wrong move that allowed the draw, I think, was king a5. I think instead of king a5 king a4. Instead of king takes a4. Let me demonstrate. Move 47 for black. He could have played bishop f4 followed by bishop g5 and still win the game. And we will see it right after the game ends. So Hutch will put it on his board and we'll be able to demonstrate. People in the chat are offering ways to survive. I see Hutch writing some things in the chat. And he says he thinks he is lost, which is not entirely true. Black is not lost here. Maybe in case of king g6, instead of h4, one move ago, there was an easy draw for black if he wanted to. h4, king h5, bishop g3. So let's see the game. They just exchange. Now black is going to take the pawn on a2 most probably. Hutch is offering a draw and his opponent agreed. Okay. Wow.
Man, I think I had a winning game at the end there.
Yeah. Awesome defense by both of you, I have to say.
I know where I went wrong. I can tell you exactly where I went wrong there.
Please.
So, yeah, okay, so on move 47,
yeah,
when I took the a4 pawn, I should have swung my bish to f5 and then to g4 the move after that.
f4 g5, yes, that's what I was saying. And then you would have had to give up his h pawn in order to get your h pawn. and you would win. However, even though you're absolutely right and it's winning, it's more difficult than it should have been. And a move earlier, actually 2 moves earlier, move 45, when you play G takes F5.
G takes F5. Okay.
A more accurate move by principle is to play G5. You don't want to exchange pieces when you're on the strong side. So if you play G5, I think it's pretty easily winning, and I can demonstrate it. Can you make moves actually on the board?
Yeah, from here, but once I make moves, I can't. It's hard for me to get back to the original game. So that's yeah. We can finish it out with this. So yeah,
Okay,
I'm
so
on, 45.
so
right now.
first maybe demonstrate what you were saying on move 47. The bishop f4 variation. You can demonstrate it. Bishop f4, king e6, bishop g5. Yeah.
Okay. So do you want me to play it from 45 or from 47? Right?
Start from 47, so you won't have to lose it, so people can see. Bishop f4, move 47.
Right. And
And now,
king e6. Right?
yeah, bishop g5, and then king f7, king takes a4, king g6, king a3, king h5, king takes a2, h4.
Right.
And this is the critical position.
Yeah.
And how do you win here?
How do I win here? I would say probably bishop f4, right?
Well, bishop f4, king g6.
Okay. Oh, okay. Oof, that's tricky, huh?
Yeah, I'm not even sure it's winning, but I calculated in my mind something, and I think it might be winning. So, in this position, king b3, h takes g5,
Wait. After king e6, you mean?
after pawn to h4 later on,
After pawn to h4.
at the end of the line. So king b3, hg, and now white is forced to grab the f pawn, otherwise he will lose. King g6, g4, king takes f6, g3.
Oh, this is awesome.
Yes, king e7 is the only move, otherwise you lose very easily. G4, g2, sorry. F6, G7, F7. And this position is...
Oh, so I queen and then... Okay, I know what to do here. You go to queen to G7.
So, queen G7, and this position is actually a theoretical draw. You know why?
No, I don't.
Let me show you. King E8, queen E5 check,
Yeah.
king F8 for example. You bring
And
your
now
king,
move my king over. Yeah.
king
to
C4,
C5.
king G8. Let's
And
say...
then, queen check on queen to G5 check.
Yes, let's say for example I play king h8, queen f6 check is the usual mechanism, yeah, king g8, queen g6 check, and now normally this is winning for the stronger side because I have to waste time putting my king on f8, but here I have a wonderful defense. I can play king h8.
Right.
And
now I can't take the pawn because it's a stalemate.
Exactly.
Wow, that's nifty.
Yes, so
Man, I thought, okay, cool. Yeah, that was awesome.
so f and h pawns, or the other way, c and a pawns, yeah, bishop and rook, I would say, pawns are a draw in this situation against the queen, and the others are a win because of this mechanism you just showed. So
Yeah.
turns out that it's probably still a draw.
Wow, that's fascinating analysis there. I like
And-
that. That's nifty.
Yes, and move 45, I wanted to show you something.
takes f5, you mean?
Yes. So g5. So just on principle, you want to avoid pawn trades when you're on the stronger side, but just to see the method of how to win this position. So g5.
Yeah.
I actually should probably make the moves on the board myself so my viewers can see it as well. So g5, king d5, king a5, king e6, king takes a4, king f7.
Oh.
Sorry.
King a5, king d6, or what did you say? e6.
Yes, king takes a4, king f7, king a3, king g6, king takes a2, king takes h6, right? And now, if black gets to bring his king over, then he's winning, of course. Yeah, he will bring his king all the way to g3 and win the game.
Yeah.
So white has to exchange pawns. So he has to play king h5. Yeah. Sorry, it's black to move. King b3, king h5, for example. And now you cannot prevent the move h4, but what you can do is to play king c4, h4, takes, and now there is a key move that you can probably find.
Bishop to f4?
Exactly, followed by bishop g5, and you have some form of a fortress, and then your king comes over.
God, I hate missing stuff like that.
Yeah.
The endgame is so fascinating. It's like
Yeah.
way deeper than people think it is.
I have to admit my endgames are kind of weak for my own, let's say, standards. And
Too modest.
no, I mean it's really amazing how complicated it can get, and the less pieces there are, the more complicated it becomes, because every mistake is more costly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the end game hurts my mind more than the middle game or the beginning.
Yes.
For sure.
And as for the game itself, like the probably the most straightforward way to win, even though like there were many concrete ideas, I want to mention the most strategical one once you got the end game. So move 33.
Okay.
So the most straightforward way to win is to not be afraid of the a pawn. You played bishop b4, right?
Yeah.
So instead to just play f6, which is also it serves two purposes. One, it helps you bring the king over to the queen side, and the other one is that the pawns kind of leave no holes, so the white king cannot penetrate the king side.
Okay.
So f6, and then you just run with the king to the queen side and you win easily, with no calculation required.
Oh man, that's two or three moves here that I I guess two. I missed two winning moves.
And
yeah.
Overall everything else was kind of I would say tenacious on your part when you had 2 pawns down, and afterwards it was pretty going pretty well. And for the opening, just a quick note, if I may, actually two small things. So let's go back to move number 11.
Yeah.
So you played e6, right?
Yeah.
What was the idea? I mean, it's not a bad move, but I mean...
Honestly, it was just to take up a little bit of space in the center, and then maybe make some space for give my knight on f6 an outpost. Like, you could have easily booted it by pushing on e4.
Yeah.
But it was just, I guess it was more of a waiting move than anything else, just taking up space in the center.
Yes, so it's a good move in itself. The only problem is that it allows white to do what he just did in the game. And if you notice, you are actually leading in development, so it makes sense to open up the center and play c5 right away. And I actually suspected that you wanted to prevent... What?
Instead of e6, you mean?
Yeah, to play c5 right away. And I suspected that you wanted to prevent d5. But after d5 you can simply take with the knight.
Right.
Because of bishop takes rook.
Yeah, I looked at that. I almost did that, and then I changed my mind at the last minute and went with e6.
Yeah, c5 rook c8 is slightly more pleasant for black instead of the other way. And
he was squishing me towards
yeah,
like move 15. I was really kind of feeling squished, and then he just blundered a piece.
exactly.
And I figured, yeah.
And one tempo in the opening, it can make the difference between putting pressure on your opponent and torturing them than the other way around. There's just one tempo, so it's precious. And e6 actually wastes 2 tempi because rook e8 is another one that followed. So
it's funny. I almost resigned too. Like there was a spot where he was getting ready to swing down a second rook on the seventh rank there.
Never resign.
I had your voice popping in my head saying, well, he might make a mistake later or something, so I just decided to play it out, but I got really, really close to hitting that resign button. So I'm glad I played it out. I mean, draws are still fun. You can still draw some experience and learn from it too. You can play it all the way out to the end.
And for the opening, one more thing. So let's go back to move number 5. Actually, move 7 first. Move 7.
Yeah.
Bishop takes d5, bishop c4. Do you remember what we discussed about the tension? The first one to release the tension usually gives up something.
Yeah.
So it's usually applicable with pawns, but in this case it's the same with pieces. Both bishops are kind of attacking each other. The first one to capture is kind of giving up something.
Yeah.
So by playing bishop takes c4, you slightly compromised your position. You could have just castled. And
I guess I could have taken up more space in the center if you would have traded down right there.
Yeah. And castles, and if he castles, actually then you can play the move you played in the game, e7, e6, followed by knight bd7.
Yeah. I guess my thought process there was that was his good bishop.
Yeah.
So I just figured, okay, well, might as well just take that off the board and see if I can exploit some kind of weakness with that, but I didn't really have time to do that. He started squishing me shortly.
Yeah. It's a good idea to notice that it's not going anywhere. It's pinned, yeah? So you're gonna get the bishop, but let him move the queen first, so that you provoke an extra move.
Well, that was fun, Tal. I always appreciate your insight. I do get better usually towards. What's gonna happen is I'm gonna start playing on chess.com again. I'm gonna start getting my rating up, and then I'm gonna hit this like wall where I'd have to really start devoting more time. But I appreciate you coming on. Do you want to plug? Your stuff one more time? Where people can find
sure.
you? If you have any kind of deals coming up?
Yeah. So
advertising?
I have a channel on YouTube for those who didn't notice until now. Goes by my name, Tal Baron, and I'm just in the process of unleashing this product of. It's called a Hutch Special, and it will be 2 hours of playing a tournament, which will be live streamed on my channel, just like what we did now. But I will be whispering in your ear as we are playing, asking questions and directing you to the right ideas, and it will allow the viewers to improve as well, as they will watch this content and improve their chess for free. So that's the link will be found in the description to this video that I currently stream, starting from tomorrow. And
if you guys have the time, you enjoy these sessions with Tal, and you want to throw a little wind in his sails, then and you're interested in seriously interested in improving in chess, then you guys can see the way that I play and how I'm assuming that you guys that have watched these sessions with Tal have noticed that I have slightly improved. Not a lot, but enough to be able to, I think, remark on it. So if that's something that you guys are into, it's a really good value too. Like some people charge a lot of money for grandmaster lessons. So yeah, not a terrible deal at all.
Yes, and
okay, Tal, I gotta get some food in me, man. I'm starving. So we should. It got a little busy for me just because the gaming season kicked off with like Destiny. and some other games that popped up on my radar. But maybe we could make some time to have this be a more regular thing. I'll shoot you an email and see if we can figure out the next time that works for you.
Sure thing.
Okay, pleasure as always. Have a good weekend. I'll talk to you later.
See you. Okay, so interesting stream right there. For those who didn't manage to fully understand the remark I made during the game itself, on move 5 also, after c4, b6 is slightly inaccurate. And I provided two reasons. One is that black can, if he castles, then after c takes d5, knight takes d5. Let's give an example, like queen b3, as in the game. Black doesn't have to develop his bishop to b7. And that means that he has more choice to develop it to other squares if he's pleased to do so. And that's what I call flexibility. It's very important to maintain some flexibility in the opening when your opponent doesn't force you to show your hand. And at this point, castling was much more flexible because you were going to do it anyway later on. You're not going to definitely put your bishop on b7 because there are other choices. And not only that you have to castle before developing the bishop, it's usually a good idea to find a place for the knight before deciding about the bishop. And that's a well-known principle in chess. In this particular position, I would like to play c7, c5, followed by knight c6 and bishop to e6, and just playing for the initiative straight away, when I predict that black should be slightly better. So I think this was a good idea. And for those of you who actually are curious for the product I mentioned, it's going to be an experiment. I'm really hoping it will succeed, because the Patreon experience, even though I was very ambitious with it, it didn't seem to work out. I don't know why. I want to blame myself, but I mean, I did what I could, whatever was within my control, to send messages to all the Patreons, or patrons I should say. And for some reason I don't receive any reply, and I think it's not their fault. I think somehow I might be doing something wrong with this system, or maybe the system is flawed. But either way, if any of them did not receive their rewards, of course I'm more than willing to provide a refund, even for those who did receive their rewards if they ask. And I think the best way to compensate everyone and who actually supported me and wants to receive some reward as I promised, is to do it through the Hutch Special product, because I think it's a really good thing. And to say a few words about it, 2 hours of a stream where I whisper in your ear while you're playing in a tournament, a specialized tournament. It is legal. It's not against the rules. It's on the leeches.org site, and I create a specialized tournament where people can consult with each other, and I will be live streaming it. So let's just say that they're gonna be, and it's probably going to be streamed like once a week. So, and as I mentioned, the price is $150 for 2 hours. Just to mention that my normal hourly rate is $90 an hour. So it's less than my regular hourly rate, and it's based on the fact that I want to create high quality content so on this channel, and I'm willing to motivate people to help me out with it. And I think it should be a good idea if And if you think about it, like one person who wants to improve can purchase it, let's say once every 6 months or a year. But then if we can stream it on every single week, then thousands of people who may not purchase it will be able to view the insights for free. And even the same person who will pay once will be able to view all the other streams for free. But if no one will choose to pursue it, then it simply won't exist. So I think it's overall a very decent concept, and I've seen like how much people have improved their chess as a result. And I think an interesting experiment would be to see how it will go if I whisper in the ears of high-rated players as well. That's one of the comments that I liked, that someone left, that it's a good idea for me to show the same exact thing that I did with Hutch, but with players rated very high. Either 1600s, 1800s, or even players above 2000 rating. And I wouldn't mind even doing it with international masters. So, or grandmasters if they're humble enough or brave enough. So, in any case, I feel like it should be a good initiative if it works out. And it will be up from tomorrow, I think, the link. In the meantime, you're more than welcome to take the survey that's on the description of my video right here. And well, that's more or less it for now. I'll just mention that starting tomorrow, I hope you will be able to purchase it through the link. I'll do something like 2 months schedule in advance, and once people will purchase the 2 months in advance or on a weekly basis, then I will be ready to start with the streams. And I'm hoping to even do it like throughout the entire year on a once a week basis. And I'm very excited because I think it will be working well. It has much less potential to fail, because on Patreon I was depending on a system that I don't really know how to control. But when it's just one person at a time, not much can go wrong when I have their email. So yeah, I used to say all the different plugs, the like button, Facebook, Twitter, whatnot. But you know, the links are there. I don't really care. Subscription, hit the bell. It's your choice. Whatever you prefer, you can have. I'm gonna do some tactics on Facebook, but it really depends on how serious you wanna be with your chess. And yeah, that's more or less it for today. So it was much more fun than I expected, and I really love teaching, so I'm hoping to have more chances to do it in the future, both with Hutch and you guys. And I want to thank you very much for watching, and hope you learned something from this video, or at least enjoyed it. And if you want to learn some more, then keep watching the next videos.